Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Proudfoot podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how to come up with a combat mid-session. So let's get started. So this one's going to be a little bit more detailed than some of the ones in the past. I'm going to talk about two main methods, which is picking a monster out of the book, how to make sure it's balanced, how to add monsters to that, and then the other method, which is just making up your own monster. So we're going to start with the easy one first, which is picking monsters out of the book. So whether it be your party is adventuring through the woods and you want to throw something weird at them for them to fight potentially, or if they're talking with an NPC and things just don't go their way and now combat is just inevitable, these are some practical tips you can use. So starting with in the woods or in any sort of environmental area where a monster could strike them at any moment, think about what type of monster you want. Do you want a beast? Do you want a undead? Do you want a fae? Do you want a plant? What do you want for them to fight? Well, there are several books in D&D that have plenty of monsters in them, and sometimes they sort them by category, and sometimes they sort them by CR. CR being the combat rating. If you've spent any significant time reading through the D&D DM books, so the Dungeon Master Guide or the Monster Manual, you'll know CR comes in every single monster stat. And CR is, in theory, supposed to be a way to measure for an average party of 4 to 5 adventurers, this is the difficulty that they should be fighting. So if they're level 4, you want 1 CR for a monster. Now, there's a big caveat that goes with that, which is it depends on the party. Sometimes some players and some party makeups will have an easier or harder time with some monsters depending on their ability. So it's not really the one size fits all that it's prescribed to be, but you can have a little bit of dynamic flow and just give a little push and pull to your combats. Maybe add in some more smaller CR monsters to help flavor it. In a session I had quite recently in one of my campaigns, we went into an impromptu dungeon, which I had not also planned out beforehand and then had to come up with mid-session. I'll talk about that in another video. And in there, I wanted to throw a monster fight. So I grabbed a Basilisk, which was CR2. I put 2 of them in there, so we got to CR4. And then I put a bunch of little crawly undead hands in there. And that helped me flavor the dungeon too. Give it this creepy, old, cryptic vibe. So in total, we probably had about CR5. And even though it was CR5, it was still what I'd say a relatively mid difficulty combat. 2 party members got petrified from the Basilisks because they failed the saves. And then the other ones were fine. But because of other items I had given those party members, they were able to safely get their petrified companions back to their home base. Now, they were able to defeat the Basilisk, and it did set this tone of this creepy dungeon, especially with the hands, because they were severed from these corpses that had also been petrified in the dungeon, again, tying it back to the Basilisks, which can cause you to turn to stone. And this is part of what I want to talk about with an impromptu combat. You want to have some sort of theme to it. And it can be hard to come up with a theme mid-session, but what I do, and this is a practical tip that you can use that's very easy, is flip through the monster manual, find a monster you like, and then make it make sense in your situation. You don't have to follow the narrative story of that monster. You can make up some other lore for the monster in your world that makes sense. Or you can grab one that just so happens to plop right in nicely with its lore as it stands in the monster manual. Now, that can seem like it's hard to do mid-session, but I promise you it becomes a lot easier with practice, and if you just pick one, even if it doesn't make sense given what it says in the monster manual, change it, make it your own. This is a game of customization. It's not a game of rules and rigor, so you don't necessarily have to make it so that the monster you picked is good aligned like it says in the monster manual. Make them evil, or vice versa. You can play with those sorts of things. You can also tweak and modify the stat blocks if you want. One of the fun things you can do is take a monster that doesn't normally have spell casting and give it spells, or a monster that does have spell casting and change some of the spells it has access to. Again, this all comes down to you as a DM have unlimited free will to customize as you see fit. And this transitions us nicely into the other side of coming up with a combat mid-session, that is just completely making up a monster from scratch. The Dungeon Master Guide does have tips for how to do this. I find for myself, I will write down their HP, their AC, and their 6 main stats. So their strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. And yeah, you should probably try and come up with their AC from their dexterity and come up with their HP loosely from their hit points. But again, because that's tied into leveling class, you can fluff that one a little bit more. You can give them some resistances and some vulnerabilities that make sense. Give them some skills that they have that are actually trained skills and not just the generics from the modifier of the stat that it would go with. Give them a weapon, maybe even give them a spellcasting focus, and depending on the level of difficulty you want this enemy to be, give them some legendary actions, maybe some bonus actions, or some situational effects. These are all things that you become more familiar with as you play with more monsters in the monster manual, because you'll see what sort of effects are already out there that you could pull from and glob into whatever you're making. So that's really how to do a combat mid-session, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing, so having some combats planned out, especially for a first-time DM, is nice, and that's probably what I plan the most to this day is combats. Even if I start a combat mid-session, I don't have to end it that session. It could be a combat pause where they get to a certain point and they're not close to defeating it, and time is running out in the actual real life that we have to play D&D, and we say, okay, we'll call it here. We'll pick up next week with the initiative order at the top, and then we'll continue this combat. And the nice thing about that is it gives you time as a DM to think about all sorts of twists that you can put on your combat. However, if you want to end the combat that session, what you can do is take a 5-minute break. Say, hey guys, I just want to take 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, get some drinks, that sort of stuff, and think about what sort of changes you want to make to your combat. This is totally acceptable. I've done this before, and it's given me that time to have a little bit of creative moments to say, okay, what can I also bring into this fight? How can I make it a little bit different? And one of the main things that gets overlooked, I think, from first-time DMs and new DMs is the environment. You can have the environment start to have actions. This is given with some legendary monsters in the monster manual. They have what are called layer actions. You can do that in any sort of environment. Maybe you're in the middle of a thunderstorm and there's a chance you might get struck by lightning, or there's a huge windstorm and some of the trees are falling over. Maybe you're having a combat in the middle of a riot and there's just a whole bunch of people running past and you could get trampled. So you have to do all these dodges and dex saves partway through the combat. Never underestimate what environments can do for you in a fight. So those are some of the things to think about when you're doing a combat mid-session, finding appropriate monsters, making monsters up completely from scratch, and using the environment. The final thing to remember is if it comes out a little bit easy, that's okay. If the fight ends up being really hard, that's okay too. It's not uncommon in D&D for players to die every now and again. You just shouldn't wing a combat and then have it be a total TPK. So that's where you want to be a little bit dynamic. If it's looking like the party's going to die, maybe explain or nudge them in the direction of, hey, you guys could try and run away. There's not much shame in running away, but some parties really look down upon it. I personally think I'd rather preserve my character than be so stubborn as to sit through an unwinnable combat. Okay, that's everything I had to say on planning a combat mid-session. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the subject. And as always, may the gods have mercy on your soul.